Hello everyone and welcome to another video with me, 320 Simpilot, and today we're going to take a look at a much requested feature, RNAV approaches. For this video we're going to look at what they are and how we would use them in the Airbus, and we'll be using the A320neo in Microsoft Flight Simulator. As always, I am a real-world Airbus pilot, so hopefully this can give you some extra context on your home simulations, but this is not for any real-world use, and it's just to hopefully help you out in your flight simulators at home. There are still some limitations with the A320 in Microsoft Flight Simulator, so we are going to use the Flybywire A32NX mod, as you can see here in its rather fantastic Christmas livery. Also, I'm going to include some footage from other simulators, just so that when the mod is updated further in the future, you'll have a good idea of what other things we can do in the Airbus, as not all features are simulated yet. We are starting off, as you can see, climbing for a short flight from East Midlands down to London Heathrow, where we'll fly an RNAV approach onto 09 left, and we'll talk through the setup and how we're going to do that. So let's get started. Just before we do, I would like to talk about our sponsor for today's video, Airline Experience. Airline Experience is run by 4 current airline pilots, James, Anna, Nick and Graham, and they have a fixed base Boeing 737NG simulator in Surrey, southern England, where you can go and have a go at flying it with them. I have done this and it is great fun and a great way to get your hand in with a 737NG. They are currently running a 2-for-1 offer on their gift boxes, as well as if you use the code 320 Simpilot, you can get 30% off your next booking and have yourself a go at the Boeing 737NG with a real pilot next to you. Back to the video. So just to show you some context on what I'm doing, here we have the route I'm planning to fly. A320neo selected, the fly-by-wire mod of course, from East Midlands to Heathrow. East Midlands is up here and then flying south to Heathrow, departing from 09 with a direct. That's not very realistic, but that's not the issue today. We're going to do a Honolulu arrival, which will take us from the Honolulu VOR down towards London, and then via Westcott. Then we'll fly the RNAV Zulu 09 left. So it says RNAV 09 left dash Z. The Zulu or Z is designating that as the most commonly used approach if you're doing the RNAV 09 left. You'll see that there are Yankees as well. So RNAV 09 left Yankee, which will be the less common version. So that is just a quick way to set it up. Of course, you can also set it up in flight in the MCDU, as I've shown in my MCDU tutorials. RNAV approaches are a method of approach like an ILS or Instrument Landing System, except they aren't quite as good as that, and we'll talk about why. RNAV stands for Area Navigation, and it's a method of navigating aircraft using its onboard navigational systems. So the Airbus can fix its place over planet Earth using the onboard systems. It doesn't need a signal from outside to do that, which is one of the clever parts of it, although it can use GPS, and that's what we'll be using to fly an RNAV approach. Usually for an ILS, you need transmitters on the ground, which the aircraft receives and then uses that to guide itself down to the runway. But for an RNAV, we don't need any transmitters on the ground, which is why they're used. They count as a non-precision approach. A non-precision approach means there is no vertical guidance to guide us down from the outside of the aeroplane. In an ILS, which is a precision approach, that would be the glide slope, but we don't have that. We have to base our altitude on what we expect to fly as we come down the approach. There are 2 ways to fly an RNAV approach, but we are going to be using the simplest way, the final app style approach. Final app is a mode the aircraft can use to fly, and you will see this very shortly in the flight deck when we set it up and when we fly the actual approach. If this all sounds a bit intimidating, don't worry, I will show you the simple way to fly one of these approaches now, and then I will take you through it step by step and also show you some of the more advanced features later on in the video after we've flown the approach. Here we are on the flight deck now, heading south. If I zoom out, you can see that I about 60 miles away from Heathrow, so we haven't got long, so we have the speed right back at 220 knots while we talk about the approach. So we set up the approach earlier in Microsoft Flight Simulator's planner. As you can see here, our approach, if I select the airport and arrival, is set to RNAV 09 left, Honolulu 1 Hotel. RNAV 09 left is the important bit, and if I scroll through, you can see RNAV Yankee, RNAV Zulu in here. So you could just select it like this, and then insert. So some things we need to be aware of. when we're setting up one of these approaches, we need to check the coding. And by coding, I mean check that the approach is tuned correctly into here. Well, it's not really tuned, it's just loaded. It's going to use waypoints and navigation data based on where the aircraft thinks it is. So these are just points that are out on the approach to the runway. If I go to plan and zoom in, you can see Abavi is a point here and L09LF is here. So these are in line with the runway, and that is effectively the final approach course to land. So that's what we're going to use. That's what we loaded in by selecting RNAV Zulu 09 left. In the real aircraft, we would also need to check a few other things. It would show you the inbound course direction. So obviously we're landing on runway 09 left, so we need to check it matches the runway somewhere in the region of 090 degrees. But that's not shown yet in this mod. Also, we would check the angle over here on the right to show us how steep the approach will be. Normally it's a 3-degree approach for an ILS as a standard, and typically it's the same for an RNAV approach, but it can vary, so you have to check that carefully. The easiest way to check these things, sadly, is not available in Microsoft Flight Simulator, but we can use Navigraph for charts. So I'll bring up the charts for you now. And as you can see, if I go to approach, scroll down at Heathrow, and then select RNP Zulu for 09 left, if I can find it. There we go, RNP Zulu 09 left. So here we go, there is that Abavi and then L09LF. So those points match, and we can see that the altitude we expect to start the approach from is 2,500 feet, which is here. Then it's a 3-degree descent, which is shown here on the chart. Sadly, we can't match that into the coding yet. And then we're going to fly down the approach. You'll notice the distance and altitudes are drawn here. This is the distance to the runway 09 left. We aren't using this VOR, but that can be useful for situational awareness anyway. We are using purely the GPS and the aircraft's ability to navigate. So what I'm going to do is make sure I meet these altitude constraints, 2,500 feet being the last one. As you can see here, Abavi minus 3,000, so that's below 3,000, and then minus 2,500 L09LF. Now it says minus 2,500. If you can't see that pink number, make sure you have CSTR pressed, constraints pressed up here. Now actually we need to be at 2,500 feet at L09LF, and then we can start our descent. We then need to check our altitude as we descend, and you'll see we should have a vertical scale on here showing that. It does not work yet in this mod, but you will see it later in the video. We would also, on modern aircraft, have a lateral scale, so it looks very similar to a glide slope like an ILS, but it's not the same thing. So we need to get to 2,500 feet at L09LF and then start our descent. To do that, same as an ILS, we will press approach. We are not going to fly the ILS, so we will not select LS. We do not turn this on or it will not work, in the real aircraft anyway. We're then going to check our distances by looking at distance to runway 09 left, which will appear hopefully on the top right of the navigation display after L09LF, and I'll talk about that as we get lower. The next very important thing is that we know the QNH. So I know the QNH today is 1013. If you aren't sure, you can go to air traffic control, nearest airport, or however you want to do it, and get the weather at the airport you're planning to go to. Or you can see it if you go to weather, and I can see here that the QNH pressure is 1013. So very important we know what our QNH is when we descend to an altitude. As we get lower, we're currently at flight level 150 using standard. When we descend to an altitude, we will select the QNH and make sure we're at the right altitude. The reason is it's so important because there is no glide slope from the ground to confirm how high we are above the ground, so we need to know our altitude is correct using the correct QNH. As I said, this approach is based on the aircraft's navigation systems, so we need to go to the MCDU progress page, prog, and check down here that we have the accuracy required. So required at the moment is 3.4, nav accuracy is high. If that goes to low, we cannot fly this approach using the mode we're going to use. It means the aircraft is not navigating sufficiently accurately, it is not sure of its position. You can see my estimated accuracy is 0.07 nautical miles, so the aeroplane knows where it is over planet Earth within 0.07 nautical miles, so very accurate. But like I say, that could reduce. I also want to see GPS primary. This means that the GPS is working on the aircraft and is sending the signals to the navigation system so it can monitor where it is, and that helps keep this accuracy high. So we need to have GPS primary and accuracy high displayed on the MCDU. Also in the real aircraft, I could type in the threshold, so 09 left, and put it here, and it would appear and give us a bearing and distance. Does not work at the moment, sadly. If anything that I'm talking about here is not working in your simulator, it could be that you are not on the latest version of the fly-by-wire mod. I am using the latest development version as of the recording of this video. So I'm using the development version of the fly-by-wire mod. So there we go, we have our route to Westcott, Abavi L09LF, runway 09 left. If I leave the airplane flying, it will navigate itself to that point. At the moment it's going from Westcott and then via Bovingdon and so on, a few other points. I can actually skip out, make it a bit easier. I'm going to go direct to Abavi. Abavi there. Yellow line shows the right direction. Insert. And now we have nav, and Abavi is in the top right, 28 miles away. And I need to be 3,000 feet there, so I'm better to start my descent. I'm going to descend to 3,000 feet. Thrust lever, so the thrust lever is not quite right. Let me just set that. That should be there. There it is. So thrust idle open descent, flight level 30. So let's set our QNH. Not like that, like that. QNH 1013. As I said, incredibly important we set the correct QNH. So either you get it from air traffic control or your weather setup. If you press B in Microsoft Flight Simulator, it will tune. So for example, if I accidentally set the wrong one and then press B, it will set it to the correct one, just pressing B on the keyboard by default. So now we are descending down to be level at 3,000 feet. And we're going to need to increase our speed. I talk about how to descend and when to descend in another video, which I will provide a link to if you need help with that. And let's just wrap up then what we're going to do. We are going to descend to Abavi. At Abavi we need to be, as we can see from the pink 3000, we need to be at 3,000 feet. By L09LF, the next waypoint, I need to be at 2,500 feet. And I need to then arm approach. I can, as I will today, just arm approach. I will get down to 3,000 feet and arm approach before Abavi, and it should do the same thing, intercept final app. We will not press LS, because that would ruin it. In terms of configuring the aircraft, so what speed and distance do we want to be, it's very similar to an ILS. We're actually a bit high here, so how can I fix that? Let's go for some speed brake. I'm going to use full speed brake. It won't work, only half speed brake works in the 320 with the Autopilot in real life, but here we are. So descending through 10,000 feet now, I'm going to put those landing lights on. And this is where we would turn on the LS button if we were flying an ILS, but we are just doing an RNAV, so we will not do that. Also, we should do 250 knots at the moment, although if you're high, air traffic control sometimes let you use a higher speed, so it is possible to be at this speed at this point. I've got the correct QNH set, very importantly. And before we reach these points and before we can press approach, I need to also activate the approach in here. So if I go to perf, next phase, and go to the approach phase, I need to make sure I have the weather loaded in. Oh yes, and the one last thing, let's make sure we get that MDA set in. So if I go to charts again, and I can see down here, we are doing a straight in landing, 09 left, and I'm going to do an LNAV VNAV because I'm using final approach mode, which covers lateral navigation and vertical navigation. So I can put in 570. Okay, we're getting very close to our Abavi point, so definitely time to slow down. This is very fast, in fact. So manage speed, and now I need to activate that approach phase. Now I've entered the information, and this way it will target green dot. I want to be 3,000 feet by Abavi. Looks like we'll be pretty much there. If I'm worried about it, I can pull the vertical speed, and let's do 1,400 feet per minute. Vertical speed 1,400, and that will force the airplane to descend at 1,400 feet per minute. And I'm using the speed brakes to slow down. We can configure as we descend on the approach because we're using final approach mode. So that means I can configure pretty much like an ILS, but it's important I know how far away I am to landing. So about 10 miles away, I want to be 200 knots, flap 1. As we descend on the profile and around 2,000 feet above the runway at the latest, I want to be flap 2. Okay, we're reaching 3,000 feet now. Looking good. I'll just let it go into outstart and level off. There it is, speed outstart. Now I'm going to press approach. And we should see, it would normally say app nav final. These modes would arm here, but it doesn't work yet in this simulator. So we will look at that later in X-Plane. But here you go. Glider, localizer, goes to localizer, but it will work when we come around the corner. It just looks a bit funny for now. App nav, there it goes. So approach navigation. So its lateral navigation is now set for the approach. We'll keep it slowing down. We are a bit fast here. In fact, we're below 250 knots. We are fast. Let's put the gear down now, and that will get us more drag. 250 knots is the limit for extending the gear, extension 250. Now, very shortly, at some point before L09LF, there we go, final app, because it can actually intercept that glide slope. And normally in the real aircraft, let's put out the first stage of flaps to 1, and we'll bring the speed brakes in. In the real aircraft, you would actually see a vertical sort of glide slope, but it's not accurate as a glide slope. It's just a scale to show you if you're at the altitude the aeroplane thinks you should be. Now we're below the next speed target, or sorry, the speed limit. So we'll put out flap 2, and we'll keep descending and decelerating. We can see our distance to a bavy, so that this number sadly doesn't work as well as it does in the real aircraft. So this is where it gets tricky to judge your height. So for example, 6 miles from the runway, and I can see the runway is about 6 miles now. I want to be around 2,000 feet, so we're pretty close. But in the real aircraft, you would have a distance up here to your landing. Let's go to flap 3. So we can only just use this. So we're soon at 5 miles to touchdown. I can bring up the chart as another way. FS 2020 charts. And you'll see that at 5 miles from landing, I want to be 1730 written there. So just gone through 5 miles. We're about 1800, so not far off. Let's go to flaps full. Arm the ground spoilers, get the last of the lights on, taxi, and we'll bring the cabin crew, and there we go, ECAM memo landing no blue, and we're using final app mode. So we're in a good place. So the aircraft is now flying using its own navigation system to track us towards the runway. Unlike an ILS, however, it doesn't work as low down. It's not as accurate down to the runway, which is why we have this MDA of 570, which is a bit higher than you would have on a normal ILS approach. Finally then, what do we do as we get lower and as we get through that MDA? So once we're down at sort of 500 feet, how do we land from there? Well, we're going to disconnect the autopilot. We can't auto land off an approach like this, so we have to disconnect the autopilot, and then we're going to turn off the flight directors because they won't be giving us useful guidance. Now in modern Airbuses, it is possible to leave those on depending on the sort of approach, but the simplest way is to just turn them off. We're not using them. So it's important that you can see we are doing our nice 3-degree approach. We're using about 700 to 800 feet per minute, which makes sense. Probably 700 is enough. We've got a ground speed of 134, so about 700 feet per minute. So what we're going to do is make sure we try and keep that vertical speed, 700 to 800 feet per minute, after we take off the autopilot and fly visually down to the runway. As you can see, not quite as perfectly accurate as an ILS because it's not a precision approach, as I said earlier. Right, so time to try it out then. Let's take out the autopilot, take off the flight directors because we're no longer following them, and now just keep that vertical speed as best we can, about 700 to 800 feet per minute, 2 whites to red out the window. You don't need to do anything basically because the airplane should be pretty much trimmed because it's an Airbus, it's auto trimming, and you just need to fly visually to that touchdown zone. It's keeping 800 feet per minute. I think the pappies are slightly sensitive here in real life. That'd probably be good. So we're descending a bit fast there. Let's make sure we get that under control. And now you can just land visually as we talk about in my landing tutorial video. Hold it there and touch down, spoilers, reverse green, and hopefully some sort of deceleration. There we go. So that is an RNAV approach onto 09 left at Heathrow. Just to recap then, what did we do? Well, we set up the approach in the MCDU. We checked it with the charts if you have that available. If you don't, check the altitudes that you want to be at on the navigation display using the constraint button to show you those purple/magenta numbers. We will activate the approach mode in the FMGC just as normal, or the MCDU. We can configure a bit like an ILS, and we will arm the approach as we get closer to those points. We will then descend, checking our altitude for a rough check in this case, but just checking it's sensible. And then we will, when we are able to visually land, turn off the autopilot, turn off the flight directors, and land the aircraft. Now let's have a look at X-Plane and see some of the other tricks we can use to help us in the Airbus, which will hopefully come to Microsoft Flight Simulator in the near future. Okay, so here we are now in X-Plane 11 in my 320 Simpilot Manta livery. We're doing the same flight, so we've just departed from East Midlands to head down to Heathrow for the RNAV Zulu 09 left. We've already seen the charts, we've already seen the approach. Let's just have a look at some other ways we can help ourselves. Okay, here we are in the flight deck of X-Plane 11, and if you look here, we can see on our tablet, I can bring up the charts here, which is quite handy, RNP Zulu runway 09 left. So I'm going to select that in here, and it's the same chart as we saw earlier. Abavi, 3,000 feet, L09 left, 2,500. Let's bring up our MCDU, which I have here, and our navigation display, which I'll put to plan mode and zoom in. If I go to flight plan and I have constraint selected up here, as you remember from earlier, I can scroll through and see what I'm doing. Let's select the airport, select the arrival, and now let's just make this a bit bigger for you guys. If I can, maybe I can't. No. Select the arrival, and now I'm selecting RNAV 09 left Zulu. It appears on the navigation display in plan mode. There we go. And you can see the same waypoints as before. Let's insert that. And now I can check in here, as I said earlier, the inbound track 089 degrees, which does not appear in Microsoft Flight Simulator, but it is something we would check in the real aircraft. It's 090 degrees on the chart, so 1 degree difference is okay. Any more than that and we wouldn't fly it, although realistically in Microsoft Flight Simulator or X-Plane or whatever simulator at home you're using, they could be different. It depends on magnetic variation, charts and so on, but in real life we would check they are within 1 degree. We still don't see the vertical angle here, which should say minus 3.0 because it's a 3.0 degree approach. Hopefully that comes in the future to these add-ons. Once again, I see 3,000 feet shown at Abavi, 2,500 at L09 LF. Importantly though, as you can see, not below, just at. You don't want to be below those altitudes. I can do the same thing as before. I can go direct to Abavi, which is what I would do, direct to Abavi and insert. I'm just going to enter the destination data as before. So I've entered the destination data, and now to clarify, I'm using LNAV VNAV minima 570. 570 into MDA, not into D8, into MDA because it's the altitude we're using. We're not using the height above the ground, we're using the altitude which is above sea level. So we are going to have to be visual with the runway by 570 feet above sea level, which is about 490 feet above the runway because the runway is not at sea level, it's slightly higher. I've got to check these distances as we descend, and something else I can do to help myself check those distances is go to the progress page, and as I showed you earlier, EGLL 09 left, and I can press it here, and now you see that distance figure appear here, 63 miles away. Perfect. I now have a distance to aim for, or a distance to judge my height on. Otherwise, it's the same things as earlier. We have GPS primary, accuracy high. We will not press the LS buttons, and we will activate the approach phase in the MCDU when it's suitable, and once we've done that we can arm approach as we get towards Abavi. You cannot cut in on RNAV approaches, so you cannot go to the L09LF waypoint. The reason is this is effectively our final approach fix, so from this point we are going to be descending. We can't be in the turn and descending because it's not safe. So what we need to do here is make sure that we are already established inbound. That's why we can go direct to Abavi, but not to this waypoint, because from this waypoint we're beginning our approach, so we already need to be on the right, roughly the right heading. This is sort of technical stuff though. Obviously in Flight Simulator we do our best. What I want to show you then is how we can be at the wrong altitude in this case, because there's nothing to confirm it on the ground. So I said it's important we are on the right QNH, which I know is 1013 today. If the QNH on the ground in Heathrow is 1013 and I accidentally select an altitude of, for example, 101 or 1023, for example, if I get it wrong and accidentally set a higher QNH than it really is. Well, the problem here is my aircraft now thinks I'm higher than I actually am, because each millibar is about 30 feet. So you can see now, if I wind this back to 1013, this is my actual altitude, 7,100 feet and descending. If I wind up to 1023, The aeroplane actually thinks I'm 7,300 feet and descending. Because we're flying this vertical profile based entirely on this altimeter, there is a big risk here that we would be too low on the approach, and we would think we are in the right place, because when we look at our chart, we would see our altitude on the chart. For example, at 6 miles we'll see 2,000 feet, and we'll think that's fine. But it won't be 2,000 feet, it could be lower or higher, depending if you get it wrong. So incredibly important you get the right QNH in there, 1013 today. Just to demonstrate this, I'm in managed speed mode, 250 knots target. We're about to pass over that magenta D, so the approach phase will activate as we do that, and you'll see the speed suddenly go from 250 and it will disappear down, and you'll see it appear as our approach speed, but actually it will target the green dot speed. There it goes. So now the approach phase has activated, we get the VDEV scale and the LDEV scale, and this is what I was saying is missing in the Microsoft Flight Simulator at the moment. If I accidentally turn on the LS button, you can see that we get the localizer and glide slope scales of the ILS, but that is not useful to us, and it means we can't fly the approach we're trying to fly, and you'll see VDEV flashing in amber because it's warning us it can't fly the approach that we have tuned. You see up here RNAV approach is selected. So I press LS again, and there we go, we get those scales back, which is great. I'm going to descend to 3,000 feet now because I want to be at 3,000 feet nice and level by the time I reach Abavi, because at Abavi I want to be 3,000 feet because shortly after Abavi I will begin my descent. You can see on this chart that Abavi to L09LF is 2.6 miles, 2.6 there. Now it's only 500 feet. On a 3-degree approach, every 1 mile we descend about 320 feet, as you see here. So 7 miles, 2360, 6 miles, 2040. So 320 feet descent. So we only need about 1.5 miles to descend from 3,000 feet if we do 3 degrees. So actually, if we get to Abavi at 3,000 feet and arm the approach, we can expect to fly past Abavi and then start a descent shortly after down, passing L09LF at 2,500. Alternatively, we could descend straight to 2,500 feet and then descend from there. It's your choice really, just following the procedure in the chart. Now we are approaching Abavi, which we can see here, Abavi, and what we're going to do is arm our approach. So I'm going to press approach, and now you see app nav in green. It's already activated the lateral navigation line, and final in blue because the vertical profile is the final profile. When it intercepts the final mode, it will go final app all across the top. In the real aircraft we would actually get a little arrow here that would show us when we're planning or when we expect the aircraft to descend, but that's not going to work today. Now what I'm going to do is have a look at my progress page, and I can see my distance to touchdown is around 11 miles, but I'm actually slightly off track here. But even so, time to start slowing down. Let's put out flap 1, speed is checked, and flap 1, and then when this VDEV scale meets me, I'm going to make sure I have flap 2 out by the time we are descending. That's just a rough guide on some distances, so you'll need to adjust that as you see fit. As we turn now onto final, we'll see, hopefully soon, the VDEV scale come to life and start going down to meet us. As I said, shortly after Abavi is what I would expect. So there's final app, it's fully engaged now, and here comes that green vertical deviation bar. So now let's put out flap 2, flaps to 2. This is much more like how you would like to fly one of these approaches, not like our first one, which was far too fast. Speed is reducing, and I can see my distance to the runway is currently 8 miles. So 8 miles from the runway, I want to be around about 180 knots, 7 miles 170 knots, 6 miles 160 knots, 5 miles 150 knots, and so on. That's just a rough guide, as I said. Okay, so we are now descending. Didn't do a great job of that intercept, but it's getting back onto track now. So we will be on the lateral profile, which is our navigation line here, as we pass over L09LF at 2,500 feet, as we expected from the chart. Now let's put the gear down. Certainly by 5 miles to go. At the moment, around 7 miles. Now I actually get my distance to the runway here, 6.7. It's the next waypoint, EGLL9 left. The real aircraft will actually write that here, EGLL09 left, to tell you you're getting close to it. or to tell you, sorry, that that's the next waypoint. We still need to check our altitude, so 6 miles, 2040, the chart says. 6 miles, 2040, looking pretty good. Next one, 5 miles, 1730. Let's finish by putting out flap 3. And flap full. Gear goes down so we can arm the ground spoilers. Oh, these lights should all be on. And of course, same as earlier, you still want to have GPS primary accuracy high. Let's just bing bong the cabin. And there's our landing memo, is all green and ready for landing. So 4 miles, 1410 altitude is what we want to see. So pretty much the same as earlier. You can see bringing us out on a nice final approach to 09 left at Heathrow. There is another difference now. Once again, we have our minimum at 570. We don't and cannot use the autopilot to land. So what I'm going to do is, same as earlier, take out the autopilot, turn off the flight directors, and this time I can bring up the bird, and I'll show you what that is shortly. So we are now visual. Let's go autopilot off. Once again, flight directors off because I'm not going to use them, and bird on, which is this button here, which does not work in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Track FBA. This now gives me the track, not the heading, and the bird, and I have videos on this on my channel. If you'd like more help, look at my raw data ILS video on the channel where I talk about the bird. It effectively is showing us our angle through the air. So the wings are showing me 3 degrees at the moment, and the tail shows me my track through the air. Like I say, that doesn't work in Microsoft Flight Simulator, but same principle. I need to keep a similar rate of descent and just fly myself towards the touchdown zone visually at this point. So just looking to keep that 700 feet per minute. Bird is just another way of confirming that you're at the right angle. So the wings here are about 3 degrees because you can see the 5-degree marker below it. Right, let's bring ourselves in for another landing. You can see we are still getting that VDEV scale, so still giving us useful information. On modern Airbuses, it is actually possible, as I said, on certain approaches to use the flight directors all the way down to about here or even lower. They're quite impressive actually. So just keeping that 700 feet per minute vertical speed, keep the approach stabilised as we can. Entering the flare. Thrust levers to idle. Hold the pitch and let it settle onto the runway. Reverses, spoilers, reverse green and decel. Hopefully, there we go, reverse green. And there we go. Another landing off a non-precision RNAV approach. That's all for today's video. I hope it's been useful for you. More tutorials to come on the channel. As I said, just a rough guide to help you out in Microsoft Flight Simulator, and then a bit more information for X-Plane that will hopefully come to use in Microsoft Flight Simulator in the near future. As always, there will be more tutorials coming soon on the channel, as well as live streams in both simulators and other sort of tips and tricks videos. So do please subscribe and like the video if you did enjoy it. Otherwise, we'll see you again in another video soon. Thank you very much for watching. Keep safe. Bye bye.